Hey, Nick from Playbook here. Welcome to day 83 and 84 of the Starting a Software Company in 100 Days project. Had a snafu last night. I recorded a video quite late. One of the lengthier videos I've recorded, and it turns out that my AirPods weren't synced up with my computer quite yet at the time that I pressed record. So we ended up losing or producing a passionate but audioless video. And I don't think many of you, you're like me actually, and cannot read lips. So I apologize for that. So once again, we're condensing 2 days into one, but so be it. That's the real world. So today I want to ask a question. Are minimum viable software products, or more specifically, is the advice to build a minimum viable software product bullshit? Um, this goes back to the lean startup. Um, Rather than putting together a big waterfall project and building out a fully featured product, the philosophy is, put out something small that your customers can try out and iterate from there. And so if I go back, and I'm gonna mention an article coming up here after a little while that I think is quite amazing and has a better acronym for starting out, building smaller software projects. But for now, I'm going to just talk about, a little bit about the MVP and why I decided to remove. Man, my spelling is awful today. Minimum and viable. And we all know what this one is, product. So let's go back to my decision here a week ago or so to decide that we aren't going to release a public-facing version of Playbook on day 100. And at first, I thought about my concept of minimum is something that has a little more power to it than just a checklist application, a process to-do list, checking off a bunch of tasks. That didn't meet my specifications of minimum, but it would have met some people's specifications, some people's minimum specifications. And so, as I was thinking about, what am I doing here? Am I falling into the trap of just simply not building an MVP? Like, why aren't I listening to, thousands and thousands of people's advice on, building something small, getting it out in the wild, and iterating on the feedback? And I've been thinking a lot about that the last couple of days. And actually, Boris, who's a follower of this channel, commented a few days ago and was questioning my reasoning behind cutting cutting this public goal from the scope of this project, the public release goal in 100 days. And so I sat there and I thought, and I was, you get a little bit defensive when people push back. And so I thought, well, just a checklist tool isn't good enough. Well, just because it isn't good enough for me, yeah, we are dog food in this project, but that doesn't mean that it isn't good enough for other people. So what am I doing here? And so I was reflecting, and Boris linked to an article in his comment, and I thought, oh, I'll read that. And I skimmed it, and I thought, oh, that's great. Then I really dove deep, and it's by Jason Cohen, who built the software. His major product is WP Engine, WordPress hosting software that he built up a really big business. And so I read the article, I actually read it a few times, and I came upon this graphic, and it actually comes out of the team at Spotify, I guess. And so how do you build a minimum viable product? They refer to the different modes of transportation. When you're building a car, you don't start with a wheel, two tires, and then a body, and finally a car. Obviously nobody wants, other than the manufacturer of the car, wants these first three components. But you have a skateboard which has wheels, and then in the bottom example, you have a scooter, and then a bike, and a motorcycle, and a car, and each one of these five subsets can have really happy customers. And so, whereas I was thinking about uh, the current iteration of Playbook that we're working on, the checklist components, tagging, filtering, assigning people to different teams. For me, that was maybe we got a couple wheels and we're putting the frame on, but it wasn't quite the car. But that was wrong because there are certain people that would love, a slightly different project management tool that really focused heavily on lists of tasks and tasks that you could automate, tasks um, that you can assign to different teams, and the filtering stuff we're working on, and the recurring component to tasks. And so I think I did make a mistake. I was approaching a minimum viable my target. I wanted a bike when we were building a quite capable skateboard, and there's going to be a lot of people that want skateboards. And then we could take the lessons we're learning from that, develop a scooter. And so I did. I think looking back over the last week, I made a mistake on changing that goal, uh, partially. And where I'm going with that is partially. And this article really kind of hammered home another point. Um, Rather than trying to focus on building an MVP, Jason talks about building a product that is simple yet lovable and complete. So in one of my prior videos, I talked about how I was using Asana and my other software product that I built called Harvest Profit, both in a day. And this new feature we built in Harvest Profit, I mean, I was in love with that. It really just impressed with the work that the team did. Um, Building that out works great. The UI is great. Um, yeah, I was just blown away. And then I used Asana for maybe the second or third time ever, and thought, oh, this is pretty polished. They really do a lot of good stuff in Asana. Then I went into Playbook, and it just wasn't. It was simple, it was not complete, and it was not lovable. And so, uh, rather than saying I made a mistake by not releasing the minimum version of it, it was simple, and we could have probably finished a capable piece of software. But how often do you use a software that just doesn't feel complete, that feels rough around the edges, and then come back to it a year later and think, oh man, they really, oh, I've just been waiting for this. No, you have very little time to impress your customers, and at the same time, I don't think very few of us are building completely novel tools that have no competition. So if you lose your customer right up front, they're more than likely going to go to another tool. Even if you market to them, the amount of people you're going to bring back, is minimal. And so where we were at with um, Playbook is we just had a lot. When I think of complete, I just don't think of having simple features that just work, buttons, monocolor buttons that have no contrast, or maybe the design is just all over the place. No, I think of complete as having polish, and Playbook wasn't going to have the necessary polish by the time we released it. And in today's competitive environment, I think you go back to what Rand Fishkin says on the big mistake that they made was they did some customer development. A bunch of customers said, I don't think you should release that feature if it doesn't have this, and this. Well, they said, MVPs are best practices. We'll just release the MVP. Well, they released it. A couple influential, or at least one influential industry expert said, this is not a good feature because it doesn't have this, and this. And they really set themselves back a couple years, that they had to focus on getting that feature up to par as soon as possible, um, so they could give the customers what they wanted, not just the absolute minimum version of that. And so having a polished product, um, in today's environment, I just don't think you can have, the bare minimum feature, the bare minimum product, especially in B2B SaaS. I do think there's probably some use cases when everybody who's using the product is free, but when you're trying to ask for money, I think the bar is a lot higher than it used to be, and the bar for the UI, the bar for the polish, the look and feel, and then there's this unquantifiable concept of making a lovable product and a lovable brand, having a brand that people want to look after and want to do business with and want to help support. And I Playbook obviously is a project that's in its infancy, so it's hard to get there. But I do think that we can build out, a lovable and complete product. It just isn't going to be as simple as some other products by nature. Um, we might end up releasing it yet without some of the more complex features like conditional logic, some of the pipeline stuff we're working on, which I'll have to explain more about later down the line. So simple is definitely within the reach in the quite near term. Lovables, who knows? That's hard to quantify, hard to have goals for. Complete, we just have quite a bit more work to get a complete UI that's polished. So I think of, SLCP, simple, lovable, complete, yet polished. And this concept of SLC to me is, really hits home with me. Simple, lovable, complete. And I made a mistake here. What I should have done is I should have scoped down the feature set to what it is now and spent a month or maybe 6 weeks on getting it complete and getting it polished. A polished UI, a polished Zapier integration, a polished customer onboarding process. And I added complexity, didn't spend enough time on complete and polished. And so, at the end of the day, I really love this article by Jason Cohen. I love this concept of simple, lovable, complete. The people at Basecamp talk about how the fact that you shouldn't release just a crappy, small piece of software and put that out into the wild. It should be, you should use your intuition, your market knowledge, and put out, the tool that you think your customers want. And more often than not, that's going to be something that is complete and polished. And so, recognizing that I made the mistake here, but I don't feel terrible about. Yeah, I actually feel pretty good about the decision. I feel very good about the decision that we kicked the can down the road. We're going to start internally using the product here in a couple weeks, but we aren't going to release it until the public till it's complete and polished. I think the bar is higher than it was, 10 years ago when the MVP was really the standard, or when it just became the standard operating procedure for building a software business. If you look at Notion, the software product Notion, which was built by a small team that has received a lot of traction in the marketplace, they spent quite a bit of time thinking about every little piece of interaction, every little micro piece of UI in their software. And I really think that's a big reason why they've grown. Is Playbook going to take the path of Notion? Heck, Notion raised $10 million at a $500 million valuation. No, that would be a foolish target. But I do think the fact that they spent a ton of time on the little details is a big reason why they've been so successful. And so that's what we plan to do over the next month or two in building out Playbook, is to have something that is maybe not as simple as other tools or as simple as it could be. Right or wrong, that's the route we've taken. But having something that's definitely more polished than what we have now. Putting it in the same orbit as Notion, I think is a tough bar when you only have one developer, maybe 1.5 developer resources working on the project. But at the end of the day, it just wasn't going to be as polished as it should, and that's the reason. So at the end of the day, I do think the concept of MVPs in business to business SaaS software is bullshit. and I don't think that is the best advice. If you can check off the M, the V, the S, the L, and the C, or maybe not lovable quite yet, but the MVSC, I do think then you're at the point where you can release your product into the wild. And we just weren't going to be there for Playbook. So with that, once again, MVPs in modern B2B SaaS software is a bullshit concept. If minimum also correlates with incomplete and also correlates with what Reid Hoffman says on you should be embarrassed by your first version. I don't think that is the correct path in today's environment. So there's there's my rant. Definitely could have done some things different with Playbook, but we're going to be moving forward, onward and upward, learning as we go. With that, I'm going to finally wrap it up here. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. Thank you.